If you're a high-ticket, service-based business and you're not running cold email, you're missing out on hundreds of thousands of dollars. I'm going to show you how you can create a full cold email acquisition system that is going to generate buyers on demand and function like your own private ads network. Okay, this document took me over 20 hours to write, and it's probably going to take me another couple hours to record because I'm going all out for this one. We're going to discuss everything from cold email infrastructure to cold email sequencers to creating lead lists to split testing to segments and subsegments, personalization, offers in cold email, conversion-focused script writing, deliverability. We're going to go over booking calls, objection handling, and so many other subjects. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so let's get started. Talk about public infrastructure, private infrastructure, account resellers, everything there is to go over when it is in regards to email infrastructure. Okay. Now, right away, I want to just define these terms just so everybody knows what I'm talking about. Public infrastructure refers to big email account providers that the general public uses. This includes companies like Google, Outlook, AOL, and so on, right? These are big providers. You know, your grandma probably uses them. This is just what normal people use for email, okay? Now, private infrastructure are small privately owned companies that create email accounts for the sole purpose of doing cold email, okay? Now, both have the pros and cons, so let's get into them. Now, public infrastructure is super reliable. It's online 24/7, 365 days a year. And I mean, it's pretty simple, right? You don't need to worry about Google shutting their doors down, okay? They do have better deliverability. Now, I am going to get into why that is later on in the video, but in essence, you have a higher probability of inboxing on public infrastructure when you're sending from public infrastructure, right? It's kind of like a buddy system. You're going to trust your friend more than someone who's a random person, okay? Also, there's no gimmicks. Google and Outlook don't require you to do like any weird steps. There's no weird onboarding process. You don't have to talk to anybody. You kind of just buy the email accounts and you're good to go, okay? Now, some of the cons is that it is 3 to 4 times more expensive if you're not using a reseller. We're going to get into what a reseller is in a little bit, but just keep that in mind. If you buy directly from Google or Outlook, then these accounts are 3 to 4 times more expensive than using something like private infrastructure. It's also going to take you about 5 to 10 times longer to set up if you're not using a reseller, and they don't want you doing cold email, right? For those of you who haven't heard, both Google and Microsoft are actively trying to stop people from doing cold email. And in my opinion, I think it's something to do with their ad revenue because they don't want people doing cold email when they could just be spending that money on Google ads and so on. But nevertheless, they don't want you doing cold email, so those platforms are actively trying to prevent people from using them for cold email. Okay. Now, before we talk about private infrastructure, I do have to butt in real quick and talk about what account resellers are because they are a very important part of this, I guess, section. Okay. Now, while we're on the topic of private infrastructure or public infrastructure, we need to talk about account resellers. There's 2 ways that you can get your hands on email accounts. You buy them directly from the email service provider. So you buy them directly from either Google or Microsoft. And then number 2 is you buy them from an account reseller. Okay. Now, buying them directly from Google or Outlook will always be the safest and most reliable way to do cold email. Okay. Hands down. Meaning, if you go and you pay the $7.20 per account per month, plus another $2 to $3 per account per month for all the tools that you'll need in order to actually buy that account, you're going to end up paying about $10 an account, but that is hands down the safest way to run cold email. Okay. Again, of course, there's also labor and time and whatever, but that is the most expensive and the most reliable way to do it, okay? Now, the next best thing, aside from using just infrastructure that is coming from right from Google or Outlook, is using something called an account reseller, okay? Now, these are companies that basically buy these email accounts in bulk and then sell them to other people in smaller batches, okay? Now, here are some of the popular resellers that I know of. Cheap Inboxes, Premium Inboxes, the Mail Supply, and the Inboxology are the 4 main ones that I've heard of. The first 2, Cheap Inboxes and Premium Inboxes, are both Lead Academy partners, so I can vouch for them 100%. I use Cheap Inboxes. I will use Cheap Inboxes as an example to illustrate kind of the savings that you can get if you use a reseller, right? Cheap Inboxes, if you are buying from their public prices, charge $3 per inbox per month. Meaning, if you were to buy like standard amount of inboxes, like 100 inboxes, you'd be looking at $300 a month instead of the normal $720 a month, right? And you wouldn't have to do any of the labor. You wouldn't have to do any of the technical setup. It would just be completely done for you, right? Meaning by just using something like cheap inboxes, you're already saving $420 a month and time and labor. So, obviously pretty big savings. Now let's get in and let's talk about private infrastructure. Now, private infrastructure is 3 to 4 times cheaper than buying directly from Google or Outlook, right? Again, this is not reseller prices. These are just the regular prices of Google and Outlook. A lot of the time, or pretty much most of the time actually, they do have an automatic setup, so you won't have to do anything yourself. They will be automatically set up, similar to how the resellers do it. And the actual team, which is setting up your email accounts, will know about cold email. I think this is a big benefit of using private infrastructure. The people who are actually setting it up, most of the time, know cold email pretty deeply, okay? Now, the cons are that, number one, it is not reliable, right? One person owns that company. It's a privately owned company. They can literally just turn off your business like that, and obviously that puts a lot of risk if you're using them. Okay. They also have worse deliverability, and they will deteriorate quicker. So, like I mentioned earlier, public infrastructure has a better chance of inboxing on other public infrastructure, right? So, of course, just because of that, they are going to be worse in terms of deliverability, and they can and probably will have downtime. Now, what this means is these companies will obviously have times where there's a glitch or there's a bug or there's a problem, and that's going to result in you not being able to send during those periods. Okay. Now, earlier in our agency journey, we did actually have a situation where we had the majority of our clients on one private infrastructure provider. I'm not going to mention what the private infrastructure was, just because I am still good friends with the founder of that company. But nevertheless, I had a lot of email accounts with him, and one day their server had an issue, and long story short, our infrastructure went down, and we weren't able to go, and I think we weren't able to send for almost a week. I think it was like 6 or 7 days. And obviously that was very, very bad for us. Like, we had to explain to all our clients that our infrastructure provider just decided to stop working for a week. And, that's just not something that we can do, especially now with the amount of clients we have. A lot of our deals are structured and retainers. It just wouldn't make sense for us to cut a week out of the retainer just because our infrastructure provider made a mistake, right? So for that reason, honestly, we stopped using private infrastructure in its entirety. Now, I know what you guys are thinking. You're probably thinking, okay, well, so what should I use? What should you guys in your position use? Now, historically, the only reason that people went with private infrastructure was because of its price, okay? A private infrastructure account would cost around $2 a month, and a public infrastructure account would cost $7 a month, right? Obviously, very, very big difference. And people who were on a tight budget were just straight up forced to go with the private infrastructure option because there was no option to go with the public infrastructure, right? They just didn't have the money to allow for that, right? But nowadays we have account resellers who are either beating the prices of these public infrastructures, or they're beating the prices of these private infrastructures, or they're getting very, very close, okay? So if I'm being honest, I wouldn't recommend literally anyone use private infrastructure because it just doesn't make sense, okay? Public infrastructure is more reliable, it doesn't take more effort, and a lot of the time it's either cheaper, the same price, or very, very close, and it's just worth to spend the extra money and get the public infrastructure. Hey guys, we're gonna get right back to the video in just a minute, but real quick, do you want a done-for-you cold email lead generation solution that is able to consistently book you meetings with your ideal buyers? We just helped Morty from Your Business Now book over 30 clients in just 2 months of working together, and Avi from Daily Dose of Data Science get over 40 calls in our first 10 days of sending cold email. Now, if you guys want a consistent flow of buyers on your calendar, you can book a meeting with me and my team in the description below. Okay, talk soon. Okay, so moving on, let's talk about the nature of cold email. Now, at the time of recording this video, my recommendation for infrastructure setup is getting half your inboxes on a Google reseller and getting the other half of your inboxes on an Outlook reseller. But the thing is that everything in cold email is constantly changing. Now, when you're watching this video in the future, the setup that we're using for infrastructure might be completely different from what it is right now, okay? Now, this is partly one of the reasons why it's so important to be in a community of other people doing cold email. Now, obviously for us, we have Lead Academy, we are the founders. So there, we're learning about what's going on. Other people are learning about what's going on. And that's kind of our place for staying up to date what's going on. Right now, we're always notifying our members on which email service providers we're using, what we're noticing about the market, and overall just tips and tricks. So if you're not in a community right now, you could check that out, or just be in any group. I'm not trying to make this like a Lead Academy commercial. I'm just trying to say that a genuine tip to have the best deliverability is to be with another group of people where you're able to talk to other people and see if other people are experiencing similar things to what you're experiencing. Okay, so get in a group. It's very, very essential. Okay. Now, I also want to talk about different types of email accounts. Now, this is specifically different types of public infrastructure. Okay, I want to make that clear. It's a very important detail that you need to know, because when you're purchasing email accounts, you can get kind of screwed even if they are public infrastructure. Okay, now there's three primary types. There's enterprise accounts, there's educational accounts, and there's nonprofit accounts, right? And just as the name suggests, enterprise accounts are for businesses, educational are for students, and then nonprofit accounts are obviously for nonprofit organizations, okay? Now, for obvious reasons, you only want enterprise accounts, right? You have the most amount of leniency in the eyes of Google and Outlook when you're actually prospecting. Because an enterprise email account prospecting doesn't raise any alarms, right? That's a normal business practice to email people, right? The spam filters don't ask themselves, why is this person emailing, right? Whereas on the other hand, if you have an educational account, or you have a nonprofit account, and you're sending out tons and tons of emails, that starts to kind of, ring a couple bells, and these spam filters start to realize, like, what is this person doing? Okay, so that's not a good look. Now, what I would say that whenever you're buying accounts, you should always make sure that you're buying enterprise accounts. All the resellers that I mentioned above, of course, are they're all public infrastructure, and they are all enterprise. I wouldn't recommend anything that's not. But just in case you're ever buying from anyone that's not the 4 resellers I mentioned above, then definitely make sure they're enterprise accounts before you purchase. So I think that's about it for this one. So let's move on. Okay, now let's talk about the cold email sequencer that you're going to use to actually send the emails. Okay, now the cold email sequencer can either make or break all of your campaigns. If you make the wrong decision here, then no matter what you do moving forward, it's all not going to matter. Okay, so let's get into it. I don't want you guys to make that mistake. Now, there's 5 primary options for what you can use as a cold email sequencer. That includes SmartLead, Instantly, Lemlist, Apollo, or a private sequencer. Okay, now we primarily use SmartLead and our own experimental private sequencer, but let's discuss what would be the best choice for you depending on the situation that you're currently in. Okay, so let's begin with SmartLead. Now, the pros of SmartLead, it is the cheapest to get started, and it is the cheapest to scale, right? In terms of price and what you're getting, SmartLead, hands down, best bang for your buck on the market, okay? Now, the next thing, API. It has probably the best API in the market, hands down, from all the public sequences in the market. It's critical if you plan to make automations, you plan to have some sort of interface, dashboard, you actually want to build a very real business using cold email, you probably want to look to have a good API. And SmartLead is one of those platforms that has a great system, okay? Also, community. This is not something that is directly correlated to the sequencer, but SmartLead does have a large and active Slack community where the founder himself is very involved. The reason why I decided to put this on the list is because when you're running cold email, obviously the sequencer that you use is very important, meaning you want to see that the team over at SmartLead or over whatever sequencer you're using is definitely really, really, really in the day-to-day of the operations, because if something were to go wrong, you want to know that there is someone that you can go to and get help from. Okay, now this is something that I think SmartLead does exceptionally well that the other sequencers don't do. They have a great community. Okay, now let's talk about some of the cons. It is very laggy and there are delays pretty often. I'm not going to say very laggy because that is an exaggeration, but I will say that out of all the other setting tools, SmartLead is definitely the laggiest and has the most amount of delays and kind of like just problems when you're trying to use the UI. Okay. Their customer support definitely feels slow at times. I do think they're an Australian-based company, so me being in the Eastern time zone, them being in Australia, I believe they're like 13 or 14 hours ahead of me. So I do understand that there are different time zones, but it is a little frustrating when there have been times where we try to reach somebody and we don't get a response too quickly. Okay, but that is something that I will mention. And also, Smartly does not have a great mobile app experience. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Smartly and Instantly both have a mobile app. You can basically manage your inboxes on there, take a look at how your campaigns are doing. And honestly, Smartly just does not have the best mobile app experience. Instantly is definitely better, hands down. And if you're one of the people who, you like managing inboxes on the go is going to be important. Like if you're like a solo founder, you don't have any hires yet, this is probably going to be something that is kind of a deal breaker for you. Okay. Now, I would say that Smart Lead is ideal for either high volume senders, lead generation agency owners, or people who plan to integrate with other software / tools, right? I would say that if you fit into any of those buckets, Smart Lead is going to be the number one decision. That API and that community and the pricing is really, really, really just going to overpower all of the delays and the customer support, stuff like that, because those things just matter a lot more, okay? Now let's talk about Instantly. Now, Instantly's number one pro, I think this is the reason why most people like it. It is the easiest and most stable and most premium and has the least learning curve out of any other tool. I feel like Instantly is just the easiest software to use, okay? Their mobile app, it's great for managing inboxes. So if you are on the go and you're not at your computer, then obviously you'll have a really easy time dealing with it if you use Instantly, okay? And also, they have excellent customer support. The few times that I have spoken with Instantly's customer support, we got a response very quickly, which solved their exact issue. So, of course, very happy about that. Also, here are the cons of Instantly. They do have limited API endpoints. There are some things that Instantly is lacking, which make automations very hard. I'm not going to say that Instantly doesn't have a good API, because relatively speaking, it's still amazing, but it's definitely not on Smart Lead's level, okay? Their pricing becomes a lot less competitive for larger senders. Instantly does get pretty expensive pretty quickly, so that's something that's worth mentioning. And also, Instantly does register replies a lot slower than Smart Lead from what I've realized or from what I've seen. And if you're not familiar with what I'm talking about, when you get a reply, like if one of your campaigns get a reply, that reply doesn't automatically show up in Instantly or Smart Lead for either platform. It actually takes anywhere from 30 to 60 minutes to actually register. And obviously, replying to people quickly is a very important key performance indicator. Like what your time to lead ratio is very important. So both the platforms have a delay, but Instantly definitely has it worse. Okay. Now moving on, Lemlist and Apollo. Now, simply put, if you're considering using Lemlist or Apollo for specifically sending emails, just do not do it. Okay. Now, they are both just way too expensive. They're not optimized for cold email deliverability, and neither of them even specialize in sending emails. It's just one of their functionalities, right? They're just a generalist tool, and sending emails is just one thing they do. So I legitimately wouldn't recommend anyone use either platform in any situation. Like, your decision for cold email sending should either be Smart Lead or it should be Instantly. Okay. Now, I just want to clarify, Apollo is a great tool if you're looking to get data. And Lemlist is a great tool if you're looking to do omni-channel outreach. But specifically for the purpose of cold email, do not use Apollo and do not use Lemlist, okay? Now, the conclusion here is use Instantly if you are going to be a lower volume sender and you don't plan to automate, and use Smart Lead if you are a lead generation agency, a high volume sender, or somebody that does plan to automate, okay? Now, for the best scalability, Instantly wins. For the best scalability, for the best experience, Instantly wins. But for the best scalability, Smart Lead is the top choice. Okay. Now, another thing, I actually am glad that I put this here. For deliverability, both are the same. This is another popular thing that a lot of people say, that one is better than the other. Absolutely not true. We've done this test like 100 times. Smart Lead or Instantly have no difference between each other in terms of deliverability. They're the same, right? The choice is really a matter of their secondary features and what you value more in a product, okay? Now, let's talk about private sequencers. Now, private sequencers are sequencers that are custom built to serve one specific purpose. They are pretty rare. We have one in our agency for internal fulfillment, and I don't want to spend too much time going over the private sequencer because it's very technical and it's not really relevant for 99% of people, but I do want to show you guys what that looks like so you are aware that it does exist, okay? Now, basically, the main idea behind why you would want a private sequencer is because there's always going to be more bad senders than good senders in cold email. Now, a bad sender can mean one of two things. That is, number one, that's someone who's just not good at cold email. That means they're writing low quality scripts, they're not following deliverability practices, They use bad infrastructure, spam words, like etc. They're just not good at cold email. Or number two, they're a bad sender if they are doing cold email for a malicious purpose. This is a phishing scam, sending around malware, stuff like that, meaning just straight up being malicious, right? Now, in either situation, these people who are being malicious are probably using a public sequencer like Instantly or like SmartLead, okay? Now, when you do that and when you are a bad sender, you're going to get spam complaints. Now, when you get a spam complaint, there's two things that happen. Number one, the email account which sent the email gets affected. Number two, the email server that gets affected, or the email server that sent the email also gets affected. Now, of course, the email account takes a big hit. The email server takes a small hit. But nevertheless, when you have a huge software like Instantly or like SmartLead and you are getting a bunch of spam complaints, those IP addresses do end up getting worn out after a while, okay? Now, of course, one spam complaint is never going to ruin a server, but a software as big as Instantly or SmartLead can definitely this could end up becoming a problem, right? That's kind of like the idea here. So long story short, we build our own sequencer. It has its own IP addresses, its own OAuth portals. And by doing that, we've effectively made ourselves completely independent from any other sequencer, right? And of course, this really isn't a realistic option for most people, right? And honestly, it doesn't even make sense for most people. I wouldn't do it if you're not going to be a code email agency. But it is something that's worth mentioning just so you guys have an idea of what's on the market, okay? So that's about it for this one, and let's go to the next section. Okay, now let's talk about creating lead lists. So the first thing we got to talk about is the introduction to Apollo.io. Now, Apollo.io is one of the most popular and affordable B2B databases on the market. They have about 300 million B2B leads, so you can imagine that you can virtually find anybody on Apollo. Okay, now there's two primary ways of using Apollo. That's number one, you create the lead list directly on Apollo. This means that that's the only software you use. You don't do anything else. You basically just build it right on Apollo. So you'll choose your keywords, industries, segments, whatever you want to do directly in there. Then you'll apply your ICP filter. So you'll like say, I only want the CEO or like the owner or whatever you're targeting, and you'll get the list that way. Then the other way is by enriching external data on Apollo. So what that means is you find the companies that you're looking to target outside of Apollo, like for example on Crunchbase or Agency Vista or Clutch, and you bring them into Apollo, put the websites in, and then you just simply apply the filters for the decision makers that you'd like. So like owners, founders, CEOs, directors, whatever, right? And those are kind of the two differences. Now, both ways are effective. The choice really depends on the industry and the offer that you're targeting. But all in all, Apollo gives us access to millions of leads. So whatever works better for you, then you can choose how to do that. Now, I have tons of other content on the channel and all over the website about using Apollo. So if you want to learn more about that subject, then you can. But for now, just keep in mind, those are the two ways that you can do it. Okay. Now, I also want to talk about intent-based lead lists. Now, when building lead lists, it's always a good idea to base your lists on intent. Now, basing your list on intent gives you the ability to see what your prospects are currently interested in and what they're doing by using other providers that are not you, okay? Now, for example, say you use leads from Clutch or Good Firms. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, Clutch and Good Firms are two directories that have agencies on them, right? So they're just agency directories. And most of the time, the agencies on Clutch or Good Firms are actually paying to be on Clutch or Good Firms. They're paying for ad placements, right? They're using these platforms as a method to get clients. Now, you can imagine if you scrape these companies on Good Firms or on Clutch, you're scraping companies that are not only 100% speaking agencies. You don't need to verify that. They're all 100% speaking agencies. But they're agencies actively spending money on advertising. So you can imagine that that is a very high intent lead in comparison to just going on Apollo and typing in marketing agency. Okay. Then another example, for example, Built With. Now, you can see which softwares a company is using by using the software called Built With. Now, a rough example of how you can use this. Let's say that you own a calendar software, right? You could go on Built With and see people who are using Calendly and then get those leads to contact them and try to take Calendly's customers, right? So, again, super rough example, but you can imagine if you sell anything where it's tech related, right? You can use Built With as a way to determine intent, Okay, I hope that makes sense. I know I'm going over a lot of stuff here. Now, I also want to talk about only scraping leads with emails. Now, Apollo has about 300 million leads in their database, but they don't have 300 million email addresses, okay? They only have about 60 to 70% of that 300 million, and you need to make sure that when you're scraping, you'll actually be scraping only the ones with email addresses. Now, conveniently, they have a filter for that, so whenever you're scraping off Apollo, you just need to make sure that you select likely to engage and verified under the email status category, so you're only going to be scraping the leads with emails. Now, the verified status on Apollo is not to be confused with SMTP verification, which we will talk about later. Just because Apollo claims they're verified does not mean they actually are, okay? Matter of fact, only about 30 to 50% of Apollo leads are actually completely invalid, meaning only about 70 to, or anywhere from 50 to 70% are actually valid. And you can see by our screenshots here of campaigns that we're running, 60%, 58%, 58%, 68%, you can see there's a lot of invalid leads. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. Let's talk about scraping leads. Now, when you're building a lead list on Apollo, you need to have a way to scrape this information. First name, last name, email, company name, etc. Now, the problem is that for the most part, Apollo is way too expensive if you're doing cold email from an agency's perspective. So what you need to do is you need to use third-party tools like, for example, Export Apollo to go and scrape these leads for significantly cheaper than just what Apollo wants for it, okay? Now, Apollo charges you about $400 to scrape 1,000 leads, but this tool, Export Apollo, only charges you about $48 to scrape 1,000 leads. So you can see that it's very, 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 or a lot more affordable is the right way to put it, okay? Now, also, it's very easy to use their platform, and you'll actually be able to get 500 free leads with every purchase if you use this code. Just a quick mention, that's a Lead Academy thing, so if you are interested in that, then you can use that. If not, then no harm, no foul, okay? But then moving on, SMTP verification. Now, this is what I was talking about earlier. You need to do SMTP verification every time you scrape leads. Even if Apollo claims they're verified or any database claims they're verified, I would still recommend always doing SMTP verification, okay? Now, businesses go out of business. People get fired, people get promoted, people die, people whatever. People go, they come and go. And a lot of the time when you scrape data from Apollo or any of these databases, those leads, there's going to be some portion of them that are no longer valid. And that's kind of the point of SMTP verification. Now, luckily for us, the code emailers, it's very easy to SMTP verify. It's not like a process. You basically just go, use a tool called Million Verifier, put everything in, and Million Verifier will go do the actual SMTP check. You really don't need to understand how this works behind the scenes. You just need to do it. And then Million Verifier will basically come back to us, and it'll categorize every lead in one of three ways. It'll either be a good lead, a risky lead, or a bad lead. Okay, so a bad lead means it's completely invalid. There's no point in pursuing it. A risky lead means it might exist. You can do this thing called a catch-all verification, which is significantly more expensive. So this portion of leads is actually verifiable, but it takes a lot of time and it's also like pretty pricey. So you just kind of set those leads aside for now. But the good leads are ready to send, meaning you can just start sending to them right away. Okay. Now, that's about it for that one. I know I'm going over a lot of material, so please feel free to pause the video, go back, do whatever you need, okay? But next is the company name formatting with AI. Now, when you export a list from a tool like Apollo, you're going to see a lot of data that needs to be cleaned. You're going to see company names that look like Borks LLC or Borks Inc. or Borks Incorporated and stuff like that. It's just going to be messed up, or it's going to be like all capital, right? Now, when you're emailing your prospects, you need to do everything in your power to look like a real person. You shouldn't be saying something in your email that you wouldn't say out loud, okay? Now, if you reference your company name, or if you reference their company name in your cold email, right, you're not going to say something along the lines of, hey, John, I was wondering if Borks LLC could use some leads, right? Because that doesn't sound like you're a real person. Nobody would say Borks LLC in an actual conversation, right? So what you need to do is you need to have some sort of process to validate these company names at scale. Now, again, I don't mean to make this video a Lead Academy commercial, But we have a custom tool in Lead Academy which uses AI. It has a custom batching algorithm, and it'll basically go and it'll verify these company names completely for you automatically. It does about 10,000 company names every 5 minutes, so it's very quick, very cheap, very easy to use, and it's completely unlimited for members in Lead Academy. Okay. Basically, you just put the list in, submit it, and it'll give it back to you. So super simple stuff. Okay. Now, one of the last things I want to talk about is waterfall enrichment. Now, if you've ever scraped leads from Apollo, a lot of the time, they're not going to have 100% of the data that they present. Now, Apollo tries their best to have this data, but as I mentioned earlier, they're not going to have everything, okay? Now, the idea is you use waterfall enrichment to get the contact information of the leads that Apollo doesn't have access to. So, usually, waterfall enrichment processes can be very, very different. Usually the three that you'll see people use is drop contact, Prospeo, and find email, right? They use them in different orders, but those are the three main tools that I see people using, okay? Now, we essentially scrape all of the possible emails we can from Apollo, meaning we'll literally go and we will not select, we physically will not select these two notches, which I showed earlier. We will not select these, and we'll scrape every single possible lead that we have. Okay, then we'll filter out the ones that have email addresses, and we'll get the ones that do not have email addresses. Okay, now let's say, hypothetically speaking, we scrape a list. Apollo has 60% of the contact information of the lead list. We'll take that 60%, put it away, and we'll take the remaining 40%. We'll take that 40% and we'll give it to drop contact. Then we'll take whatever drop contact was able to find, and we'll add it to the Apollo list, and we'll take whatever drop contact wasn't able to find, and we'll put it into Prospeo. Then whatever Prospeo wasn't able to find, we'll put into find email. And we'll go on and on and on and on until we have as much leads as possible. And you can see we have a diagram right here, very simple setup. As you can see, Apollo, if they don't have an email, it goes to Prospeo, then find email, then find email, and then million verifier again. So we'll validate the data one more time. And in essence, that's how we launch our process for waterfall enrichment, I guess, if that's what you want to call it. Okay. Now, keep in mind, this process isn't something that we do all the time. It's actually something that we do very rarely. Reason why that is waterfall enrichment, in comparison to scraping Apollo, is very, very expensive, right? It takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of credits, and it's also a decent amount of work. You have to sit there, make sure you don't make a mistake. So it's really not the most necessary thing. The only time when we use this is when we are in a market or an industry which has a low TAM, so low total addressable market. And when we need as much data as possible, this is what we'll do. So that's about it for this section. Let's move on. Okay, now let's talk about split testing. So split testing is one of the most important skills that you can have as a marketer, and understanding what to test, how to test it, how to analyze results, and how to just overall test scientifically will make you not only better at cold email, but better at marketing in general. It'll take, marketing from being a guessing game to being a simple science. Okay. Now, the number one most important rule of split testing that you need to remember is that you can only split test one given factor at a time. Meaning, if you're looking to figure out which audience will respond better, then the only thing that you can test is the audience. Meaning, let's say that this is the example. You have a different audience, same script, same leads, same offer, same angle, same accounts, same sequencer. Everything else has to be the same. If you want to test different scripts, then you need to make sure that everything else stays the same aside from the scripts. So same audience, different scripts, same leads, same offer, same angle, same absolutely everything else. Whenever you're running a split test, you can only test one thing at a time. Okay? So here's a real campaign example. Let's say you want to test two different call to actions. You're going to have two different scripts, obviously, because a call to action physically goes into a script, but this does not mean you're testing two different scripts. You're testing the call to actions, okay? You could say something like, hey, first name, I saw company names listing on Clutch, and I was wondering, why are you guys doing paid ad placements when you can just run cold email? Right? Can I send over a quick case study showing how we help competitor book 200 sales calls using cold email? Or here's the next email, this is the next test. Hey, first name, I saw company names listing on Clutch, and I was wondering, why are you guys paying for ad placements when you can just run cold email? Free to hop on a 15-minute free call. I'm open to showing you how we do this for competitor, right? Now, we're testing the difference between sending over a case study and booking a call directly. even though the copy had to change, because in order to have a different call to action, you do have to have a different script physically, like words do need to change. Everything else in that script stayed the exact same. And that's how you do a true split test. You can't test multiple things at once in a split test, okay? And that is the key to split testing properly. Now, another thing that I want to mention, this is going to be a really quick one, is you want to be treating your cold email campaigns like ads. Meaning, touching back on what I mentioned before, cold email is just another ad network. It's your private ad network. Meaning, just like running Facebook ads or Google ads, you're targeting a specific audience with a specific offer. The difference here is that you're just able to target a lot better, and instead of going over a broad amount of people, you can go based on a specific industry, job position, headcount, industry, whatever you might want to target, okay? But you still need to understand what it means to scientifically test and scientifically figure out what the best performing campaign will be. Okay, so that's about it for this one. There's a quick one. On to the next section. Okay, now let's talk about segments and subsegments. Now, a segment is a general industry and a subsegment is a smaller part of that industry. Okay, so here, let's do a quick example. Now, e-commerce companies can be your segment. Your subsegments would be your facial care brands, your body care brands, your jewelry brands, your sporting good brands, your food and beverage brands, right? It would just be another type of e-commerce brand which goes under that overlying bucket. Okay, then you can take it up a notch. You could go and you can say that, okay, well, now your segment is a facial care brand. What is the subsegment? Now your subsegment can be a mascara brand, it can be a lipstick brand, it can be an eyeliner brand, or any other, facial care like object that you can have a brand around. Okay, now it's important to understand segments and subsegments because without them, you're never going to be able to write relevant copy. Okay, now imagine you sell to e-commerce companies. All e-commerce companies are wildly different, okay? If you were to just launch a campaign to broad e-commerce companies without any specific subsegment, one email would go to a skincare brand, one email would go to a pest control brand, one email would go to another gymwear brand. It would be all around, and there wouldn't be any congruent ICP, okay? Now, as you can imagine, writing to those three different industries is going to be very difficult because fact of the matter is they're different people, they're motivated by different things, and they have different desires, okay? They're not all looking for the same thing, okay? Now, writing the same email script to all of them, apologies, just does not make sense, right? Now, remember the saying that copy written to resonate with everyone resonates with nobody. So whenever you're making your next campaign, just remember that. It's always better to have a more targeted campaign than a broader campaign, okay? Now imagine this. Imagine you own a skincare company called Better Skin and you receive 2 emails. The first email says, "Hello Anna, are you interested in boosting your e-commerce company's sales using abandoned cart flows? We helped Sally Streets, a dog food company, add an extra $25,000 in monthly revenue in just 6 months. Interested in hearing more." Or the second email, "Hello Anna, my mom almost purchased mascara from Better Skin today, but she got caught up in doing something before checking out. I noticed she didn't get an abandoned cart email. Do you guys have any set up? The company I work for helped Daisy's Cosmetics add an extra $25K in monthly revenue using that very flow. So I'd be happy to help you set it up," right? Now, which email do you think is going to get more replies out of those two? Is it going to be the plain, irrelevant, low effort email? Or is it going to be the personalized, relevant, and high effort email? Now, obviously, it's going to be the second email. It makes a lot more sense. The case study is relevant. The segment is very relevant. Everything about that email is just better. Even the angle is better, okay? So that's the power of segmenting your campaigns, okay? Now also, there's different types of segments, right? Segmenting at a core is just the act of getting more specific about who it is you're targeting. You don't necessarily have to segment by industry. You can go and segment by other factors like, for example, headcount, location, case studies, job title, right? There's even more different examples that you can have, but those are just to name a few, right? And I'll give you guys an example. Imagine you're contacting, for example, medical device companies, right? Medical device companies can vary quite a lot depending on how many employees they have, right? If you're contacting a medical device company that has, say, 100 to 1,000 employees, right? That's one ICP. But medical companies with 10,000 to 100,000 employees are an entirely different ICP, right? Those could be different segments, right? Okay, another example. Say you're contacting European marketing agencies and US marketing agencies. You could have the segment of, you have different laws in Europe. You have different privacy laws in Europe. We comply with these laws. We're, this, right? There's a lot of different possibilities and a lot of different segments that you can go after when you understand who it is you're targeting very deeply, okay? Now, again, for example, if you create a campaign targeting a broad industry like e-commerce, you can go ahead and instead of segmenting by industry, you can segment by job title. So you can say something like, okay, I'm targeting only the CMOs or only the CEOs or only the CFOs. So for example, if you provide fractional accounting services for e-commerce brands, then you don't have to segment by industry. You could just segment by the companies that have a CFO, for example, or don't have a CFO, right? There's honestly a ton of different possibilities that you can I guess pursue. It just depends on, can you be creative enough? So I hope this one made sense. Let's go to the next section. Okay, so now let's talk about personalization, particularly personalization in relevance to using clay.com. Well, segmentation and personalization are typically used together. We've already discussed that in segmentation. In essence, segmentation is the act of taking one big lead list and turning it into a bunch of smaller lead lists for the purpose of making every script more personal by narrowing down who it is you're targeting, okay? Now, personalization takes it up a notch, where the personalization goes to every single company, meaning every single email you send out is unique in one way or another, okay? Now, this is typically done with tools like Clay. Some people like to do it manually. I've heard of workflows where people will hire somebody overseas and that person will write like a personalized first line. But when I'm talking about personalization, I'm referring to using automated tools like, for example, clay.com in combination with artificial intelligence, APIs, and all sorts of other automations and tools. Okay, now let's do a quick introduction to clay.com. Now, clay.com is an automated platform for go-to-market teams. It helps automate several different APIs into a convenient and familiar spreadsheet format. Okay, now what that means, I know it's like, it just sounds like a bunch of words, but in essence, Clay looks like a Google Sheet, which basically has automations inside of it, right? And you can see right here, I have an example of Clay's interface. If you ever use Clay, then you'll know exactly what I mean, to the point how it's similar to a spreadsheet. But I'll go over kind of the main things that Clay has that makes it such a powerful tool, right? And the first thing is definitely the Clayagent AI Researcher, okay? Now, Clayagent is one of Clay's flagship features. It's an intelligent AI web scraper and researcher that's able to visit sites on the web, okay? So, for example, let's say you have a list of 5,000 companies and you want to determine whether those companies are B2B or B2C. Right now, this happened to us in a real campaign. We actually ran a campaign targeting the Inc. 5000 companies. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, the Inc. 5000 companies are the fastest growing 5,000 companies in one single year that are based in the United States. And obviously, for us, we have a lead generation agency. Us targeting them would make a lot of sense. And we actually did run a campaign targeting the Inc. 5000 companies. And that's what you're seeing right here, right? We were able to determine whether these Inc. 5000 companies are either B2B or B2C, because obviously we only do B2B cold email, okay? Now, you do all of this without having to write any code, without having to have any technical knowledge. You just click buttons and it just works for you, okay? Now, you can see right here, this is actually an important detail that I'd like to mention. Right here, how this actually works is we put in these websites, and Clay would basically take this website and research whether this company is a B2B company or it's a B2C company, okay? Now, the best thing is you don't just do research. That's not necessarily all it's doing, or it's not just web scraping. It's actually doing research. So it's searching up the company, it's checking the LinkedIn, it's checking the social medias, it's searching up what comes up when you search on Google, right? A lot of moving parts happen in order for Clay's researcher to actually research. It's not just a web scraper, right? And you can see right here, if I go to sell details, right, there was an example company right here, Swoogu, I think if I'm saying it right. The response that Clay determined was it's a B2B company. And the reasoning behind why Clay thinks it's a B2B company is Swoogu primarily targets businesses as indicated by their tailored solutions for enterprise clients. They're focused on event management for professionals such as planners, sponsors, and marketers associated with large organizations. The emphasis on B2B trends such as micro events for business professionals further confirms their B2B orientation, right? Now you can see Clay actually gives you a reason for why it decided that, hey, this company is B2B, which is very useful because you can see that it's doing research. All of this information, most likely speaking, wasn't just on the website, okay? Now you can see in the next picture, there is an array right here, which is basically just a collection of data called steps taken, and it actually shows you what research it did to determine that, hey, this is a B2B company. And you can see it says visited website, text on web page, a customizable event management platform made for event profs who plan in-person, virtual, or hybrid events, right? It took that. Then you go to the next step 2, visited events, www.swogo.events/ right? No, this, I guess, is some sort of subdomain or something like that, but it visited this subdomain. And you can see the third step, which it's marked the second because old programming stuff is 0 index, but that's not relevant. The point is the third step said searched Google for Swogo events, B2B or B2C, and they found the following results: Small C Community, a guide for event leaders. Now you can see that it really is doing research. It's going to different pages on the website. It's going to different subdomains. It's searching up on Google, right? It's, apologies guys, I've been talking for a while, but it's really, really doing research, okay? Now, ClayChain can be used to create tons of different variables in a spreadsheet, and all of these data points work together to really, really narrow down a lead list, right? Now, take a look at this Clay table. This is the same Clay table that I showed above, just a bigger picture of it, right? You guys can see that I took all these companies, and I determined the ones that were B2B, then I determined the ones that were service-based businesses, and then I also determined what they're actually doing, right, based on what the content on their website is, like who their ICP is, okay? Now, in this particular table, I imported a list of companies. I first found out whether they were B2B and B2C. Then I found out what their service or product, or more accurately, whether they're service or product based. And then I found out what their service is, right? And who they're offering that service to, which is their ICP, okay? Now I can go in my campaigns and I can say something like, hey, first name, I know you're in charge of company names and go-to-market efforts. Have you ever tried using cold email to generate more business type leads, right? I built a list of ideal client profile before, and I'd be more than happy to show you how you can do it, right? Now, of course, this is just a test script just for me to convey how this works. I'm not actually running this, but this would look like in a real conversation. Hey, Robert, I know you're in charge of Towers Talent's GDM efforts. Have you tried using cold email to generate more B2B leads? I built a list of accounting firms and technology companies before, so I'd be more than happy to show you how we did it. Okay. Now, again, this is just a random script I just made up really quickly, but you can see how using Clay, you can get very, very specific with what you can do. Now, in particular, that campaign had about, 5,000 companies to begin with, since it is the Inc. 5000. After we applied our filters and after we actually got only the ones that are relevant to us, we only had about 1,600 companies left. So you can imagine that the majority of that lead list wasn't actually relevant to us to begin with. And using Clay, we were able to personalize that list significantly. Okay, so that's about it for Clay. I don't want to go too much into why it works or how it works, because this video is not meant to be a Clay tutorial, but there's tons of content on my channel, online, on this website, where you can go over and you can, take a look at what Clay is exactly in detail. Okay, so that's about it for this section. Let's move on. Okay, now let's talk about offers in cold email. Now, before we do that, I want to clarify what exactly I mean by offers. Now, there's two types of offers. There's company level offers and there's campaign level offers. Okay, now to be clear, a company level offer is what your company provides like on a service basis, right? Which is like your service is what your company actually does. Okay. A campaign level offer is how you basically explain what your service is, right? It's the way that you twist it. It's the way that you explain it. It's could also really be looked at as an angle, but it's just how exactly you promote your offer. Okay. Now, for example, I'll use my agency as an example just so you guys can understand what I mean. Now, our actual company level offer, our service is done for you cold email lead generation. That's what we actually provide. Okay. But our campaign level offers could be 5,000 free leads or an outbound audit or a TAM calculation. TAM stands for total addressable market, for those of you who don't know, right? But it's just different ways that I'm portraying the value of having a cold email lead generation service, right? Now, as you can see, even though the campaign level offers aren't directly correlating to like, hey, buy my service, right? They are indirectly correlated, right? Meaning I can easily export a list of 5,000 free leads, but the person or the lead who I'm giving them to is still going to need us to contact them, right? I can easily show someone how to do cold email, but they still need us to actually do it. I can easily show someone how much TAM they have and how easy it'd be to contact them, but of course they're not going to want to do it themselves. They're going to want us to actually do it. And in any case, our campaign level offer just ends up promoting our company level offer, which is of course the goal of cold email. Okay. Now, Also, another thing I want to talk about is you need to become a specialist and never a generalist. Now, what I mean by this is whenever you're running any form of outbound marketing, it's always better to be looked at as someone who is a specialist and not a generalist, right? Now, you always want to be displayed as someone who has a specific solution to a very specific problem that's only applicable to a very specific type of person, okay? Now, for example, would you rather talk to a cardiologist if you have problems with your heart and not a primary care doctor, for example, right? Obviously, you'd want to be speaking to the cardiologist who's been specializing in exactly what you have for the longest time. And this is exactly how businesses feel when they're hiring somebody to do services, right? Like someone who owns, for example, a marketing agency would much rather work with a lead generation company that only does work for marketing agencies rather than a general lead generation company that works with everybody, right? And that's just kind of, common sense. Now, this is not only going to help you in sales, but it's also going to help you sign clients that you are actually going to be able to deliver for consistently, right? You always want to understand who your ideal client profile is and just stick to them and just don't go anywhere else, okay? Now, if you consistently sign clients that you know you can get results for and you specialize in their industry, getting results is going to be easy and it's going to be predictable. And that's, of course, what you want from business, right? You want to have an easy and predictable way of getting results, okay? So the key is to make sure that you're the only right person for the job and you have tons of experiences and you know how to fix these people's exact problems, okay? So that's about it for offers. Honestly, there's not much that I can go into because every single company obviously has like a different offer, so there's not any general knowledge that I can give, but I hope that makes sense. Let's get to the next section. Okay, now let's talk about conversion-focused script writing. So the first thing I want to go over is script angles. Now, this is pretty much where the most of your creativity can go and actually run free. This is where you're going to be trying different positioning, basically just twisting what it is that you're selling in a way which seems more incentivizing than just saying what it is you're selling directly, right? And I know that was a mouthful, but that's pretty much just like what script angles are. You're just trying to say things differently in the hope that one of the ways that you say it differently will actually just be more, incentivizing, if that makes sense. Okay, but let me just explain it and it'll make a lot more sense. Now, we're going to go into some of our favorite angles to test and the ones that have worked for us great in the past. And of course, this is no particular order, by the way. This is just like our ideas that we do. And of course, I also wouldn't take this as like a template or anything because we're always constantly changing these things. There's not one single way to write a script, but these are some of the most popular ways that we like to do it, right? So number one is poke the bear. The poke the bear angle is made to ask a question that digs deep into the prospect that's reading the email, right? This question basically gets your prospect to think about their current circumstances and if they could use your service to change it, right? So for example, instead of asking, how are you guys storing your food products? You could ask, what are you doing to never run into a cramped inventory for your food products, right? And the idea here is that you're asking them a question that gets their mind running and seeing from an outer perspective where they can change their operations, right? You're kind of getting them to take a step out of what they're doing right now and consider like really thinking what's stopping this from going wrong, okay? Another one, problem sniffing. Now, this angle is used when you have some sort of research tool, like for example, AI, scrape data, technology filters, etc., and you want to find something wrong and bring it up to the prospect, right? Now, we've used this in the past for ecom brands on Amazon where we scraped bad reviews to see complaints from the previous customers. And then we used that data, we used those bad reviews to see what their customers didn't like, and we brought it up to the prospect as an offer to fix it, okay? So, for example, hey, we noticed John had a problem with shipping. Can we help you, fix the same problem or fix this using the same method we helped for competitor, right? So the idea here is like we're saying that, hey, I saw this person left this review because they were unhappy about this problem, and we actually have a product or a service that solves this problem, and we actually help this company solve the same exact problem. And that's kind of the idea of how you're selling the prospect here. It's just using intent, problem sniffing to see who has the issue, then you offer them the solution, okay? Now the next thing is the hyper relevant case study. Now, this angle is used when you or your client has a case study in an industry that you're targeting that's super relevant, right? So for example, let's say that you have a case study and it's really, really good. It's a really, really good SEO agency, right? Right away, the best angle that you could run is just targeting other SEO agencies that are also good, but in that same market, right? Because if you know that, hey, the agency that I look up towards works with this company, then I'm going to work with this company. And that's kind of like the idea of how that works, right? Now, whenever we have a really good case study to leverage for either us or our clients, we tend to make a lookalike list of companies that are very similar to that one, and then we'll start a campaign there. Like, again, another example. If we helped Borks.io, which is our lead generation agency, add an extra 100K MRR, then a good idea would be to target another similar cold email agency like Leadbird or something like that, and leverage the fact that, hey, we help Borks.io, we can help you too, right? And of course, then it's going to be a better angle, because if you're contacting someone and they know who the case study is, then that's obviously going to be a much better approach than just saying some random case study that they have no idea about, right? So I hope that makes sense. Now, rather than saying you did work for like a fintech company and then targeting a MarTech company, you'd get a lot better results with this angle targeting fintech companies if you have case studies to back your claims that you've accomplished something very good for another fintech company, okay? So I hope that makes sense. That's, an interesting angle to take, but you really need to play with the case studies to really figure out where the best industries are going to be, okay? Now, the next angle is the lead magnet angle. Now, we've gotten amazing results with this angle, and it does make perfect sense. Why? Think about it. We are essentially offering obvious value to people, and they can just take it and use it for their business without having to pay or do anything, okay? Now, obvious value is the type of value that is so valuable a prospect can just physically not say no to it, right? So for examples, that would be like free ad creatives or free email templates or free blog creation, etc., right? It would just be the type of stuff that like you would typically have to pay for, but you're offering it for free and you don't have to do anything to actually say yes to it, okay? Now, the idea behind this is that you're providing value for free and people can just plug it into their business and enjoy. And the idea is, like the overarching idea beyond that one, is that they're going to plug it into their business. They're going to see that, hey, these ad creatives are performing 20% better than mine, which means I'm going to make 20% more money. Let me just go work with that guy. He already proved his competence to me, okay? So that's kind of the idea of that offer. And you can use this in a script, for example, like, hey, first name, do you mind if I reactivate your current email list to squeeze a few extra sales this month for totally free? Now, a script like that, if you were to send it to an e-commerce company, is obviously valuable, okay? And it's just one example of something that you can give for free that would incentivize prospects to jump on a call with you, okay? Now, moving on, let's talk about opportunity cost. Now, this angle is made to show how much a prospect is missing out by not implementing your services. Now, the idea is that your prospect reads your email and realizes they're wasting time or money, and your service can help them fill that void. Okay. Now, an example for, say, e-commerce companies on an Amazon email opener, you could say something like, hey, first name, you're missing out on about 14 sales per month by being on page 4 and not page 1. By showing what your prospects are missing out on or losing money, time, whatever that pain point is for them, whether it's money, whether it's time, whether it's whatever, right? You're getting them to want to fix the problem, right? So you're just pushing on that pain point. Now, let's move on to cold email scripts, things you should and should not do. Now, everything we talked about up until this point, they're all angles. They're not actual cold email scripts. They're just like, I would say, like the mindset behind writing a script. Now let's talk about definitive things that you should and should not be doing, okay? Now with cold email, there's a set amount of things you should and should not do. To cover some of these things, let's cover some of those things that we shouldn't be doing, or we should be doing in our cold emails. Now, number one is you always want to sell the result and not the service, okay? Number two is you want to make it easy to say yes to. And number three is you want to test, okay? Now, selling the result and not the service comes down to one simple thing. That's the fact that nobody buys a product or a service for the actual product or service. They buy it for the dream outcome, okay? If you run a lead generation company, you do not provide cold email lead generation services. You provide buyers. You are selling customers to that person, okay? Meaning nobody cares about cold email. They don't care about your domains. They don't care about any of these things. They just want results. And that's exactly what you have to pitch them, because that's what they're looking for, okay? The only thing that changes here is that you're selling the end result and not the service. Now, the next thing you should do is make your copy easy to say yes to. Okay. Now, a lot of the time you'll find it in our copy, the questions that we're asking the prospects are very easy to reply to. Okay. This means that we have obviously valuable lead magnets the prospects need to get their hands on. Okay. this means that you're making your dream outcome is so valuable that prospects need to get on a call with you. Okay. Now I'll give you guys an example of what I mean by that to make it easy to say yes to, right? So for example, let's say that you offer free ad creatives, right? And all the person has to do is say yes, get on a call, answer a couple questions, and that's it. You're going to go make the ad creatives and, there's nothing else that has to go on. That particular offer doesn't require any trust. It doesn't require realistically any time or any effort. But now, for example, let's say that you offer to do a free ad account audit where you're going to log on their ad accounts and make sure they're doing everything right. Okay. Now that requires a lot of trust. That requires a good amount of effort because they have to add you. They have to make sure you don't do anything malicious. Then they have to remove you, right? And on top of that, it's not as valuable because, who are you to say that they're not doing something right? Right? Now you can see that those two offers, they're both lead magnets, they're both value, but the first one is easy to say yes to, doesn't require trust, and is just overall is perceived as more valuable, whereas the second one is just not so much. Okay. Now, also, you never want to sugarcoat these sorts of things. Don't bait and switch, don't sugarcoat, just make that lead magnet valuable and people will say yes to it. Okay. Now, the last thing is you need to be testing your email copy. Now, cold email is very similar to running ads, as I've mentioned before several times. And that means you have to be testing several different factors at all times. Now, not all your copy is going to resonate with your audience. That's just the raw reality of cold email. Not every campaign is going to perform. Not every piece of copy is going to resonate. Okay. Now, you have to split test consistently to see which forms of copy convert into the most amount of positive replies and ultimately booked calls. Okay. And this comes back to the A/B testing I mentioned before. You need to just simply be testing factors, everything that you can possibly think to get that reply rate as high as possible. And another thing that I want to mention, which people often really overlook, is understanding what your key performance indicators are. Okay. Now, I always hear people saying that, hey, this campaign is performing very well because I'm getting this amount of reply rate or this amount of positive replies or this amount of open rate or another one of these vanity metrics, when in reality, the only metric that ever matters is cash collected, right? How many emails do you need to send to close one deal? Meaning emails per acquisition should be the only KPI. Because if you have one campaign booking you 10 calls a day, but out of those 10 calls, only one closes, and you have another campaign booking you 1 call a day and only 1 call closes every single time, then obviously that second campaign is objectively better because you're doing less work for the same result and you're going to prefer to be on that boat rather than the other. Okay. Now, let's talk about things that you shouldn't be doing when you're writing your cold email scripts. Now, those two things are going to be don't use unnecessary words and definitely don't write an essay. Now, when you're writing copy, it's super important to be direct and sell your service without any filler content. Now, your prospects are going to see right through this, and they're going to know that you're not competent in what you do if you have to use filler words consistently, like due to the fact or actually, kind of, etc. Right? You don't want to sound like you don't know what you're talking about. You want to speak directly. You want the people to understand what you're saying, and you don't want to have any sugarcoating whatsoever. Okay? Be direct and conversational in your copy. Stop trying to make your text longer with just using filler words. Another thing that I'm going to mention is don't try to use like advanced vocabulary to try to impress the other person by your words, right? I had never understood that concept of why people would deliberately make their text harder to read in the idea in their head that they're going to make it as if they're more competent, right? So like using better vocabulary makes you more competent. Do not do that in cold email. That doesn't work. There's no point in doing that. Okay. Now, another thing is to keep it short and not write an essay. Now, we've tested this again and again, right? I don't want to say that long scripts definitively don't work, but 9 times out of 10, a longer script will not perform as a shorter script, okay? Meaning, we've tested our copy where it's 40 to 50 words, and we've tested another version of the copy where it's the same value proposition, same angle, but we're giving more detail, and it's like 200 words, and every single time that campaign with 200 words would perform significantly worse, right? This is pretty simple. these people are busy. We're not contacting like people sitting on their couch and doing nothing all day. We're contacting B2B business owners. A lot of the time, these people are CEOs, owners. They're very busy people, right? The difference between them taking 10 seconds to read an email and taking 30 seconds to read an email is very significant, okay? So keep it as short as possible. Don't use any filler words because you're going to 100% increase your conversion rate with a shorter script, okay? Now just remember, to wrap this up, the key is to have a good offer, make your copy short and concise, and give people something they actually want, okay? And keep that in mind when you're writing any sort of copy, and you're always going to have an easy time getting results with cold email. So moving on to the next section. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, now let's talk about cold email deliverability. I'd say that cold email deliverability is probably the most important part of cold email, because if you're not even hitting the inbox, then there's no point of you in writing scripts, scraping leads, or doing any of the other steps, because it simply just won't matter, okay? Now, luckily for us, deliverability isn't necessarily something that's hard to understand. For the most part, if you just follow the best deliverability practices, things will work. And as long as you know everything that I'm going to show you, I mean, you'll be good, right? That's pretty much the easy way of putting it. Okay, now number one, and by the way, one thing I want to mention, all of these rules, they are hard rules. I wouldn't recommend anybody not do any of these things. I honestly think that 85% of the issues that happen in deliverability are because people don't follow these couple simple rules. Okay, so anyways, let's get into it. Now, number one, avoiding links. Best way to maintain good deliverability is to just contain words in your emails, meaning don't send links that includes unsubscribe links, don't send images, don't send files, don't send any styling, don't send anything that is not actual plain text, okay? Now, although providing links or other assets in your email might seem like a good idea, it's gonna kill your deliverability, okay? Now, I'm sure what you guys are thinking, how do I book calls? How do I send over Calendlies? Now, thankfully, we've noticed that, sending over links does hurt your deliverability, and we stopped sending Calendly links in its entirety. Now, whenever we get someone that is interested in booking a meeting, we'll just propose a time, and once they say yes, that time works, we'll send them an invite. Not only have we noticed that gives you I'd say a higher conversion rate, but also it helps you maintain good deliverability, because obviously a person having to go on Calendly and select the time and fill out their information takes more effort. So there's a bigger barrier, whereas them just saying yes is much easier. Okay, so not only have we noticed that's better for the actual results, but it's also better for deliverability. Okay, now another thing, you want to avoid spam words. Now, when sending emails, Google and Outlook will see certain words as spam words. Now, as other people use these words in the past to sell scammy or spammy products, now those words are going to be associated with spam words, okay? Now, take a look at this picture right here. I say, hey, first name, how's your day going? This copy is friendly and not intrusive whatsoever. And you can see that nothing is highlighted here. But as soon as I say, however, I'm going to portray myself as a Nigerian prince who's in eager need of your money for the new hot investment, which is guaranteed to have 100x ROI on your money, then you can see how this sentence is now filled with spam words, right? Now, the reason why I try to avoid spam words is because, legitimately speaking, there are times where you cannot portray your offer without using some sort of spam words. Meaning, of course, try your best to not use them, but you will have to use them sometimes. But if there are ways that you can avoid them, then please do, okay? And you can check if you have spam words using this tool right here. It's called mailmeteor.com/spam checker. So it'll be in the document, and the document will be somewhere in the description. So you can go ahead and check that out, right? Next thing is you always want to ensure you have enough spin text. Now, you want to make sure that you have enough spin text in your copy, because otherwise your emails are going to look way too similar. Now, you can use tools like spin.me to basically upload your spin text copy and see how many variations you'll have. And you can make some sort of baseline number that you use internally. For us, we like to see that we have, like, I'd say at least, 100 million different variations of our copy. Just because we want to make sure that our emails are never going to be marked as spam just because they're too similar to each other, okay? Now, adding spin tags basically makes it so you're sending a different email every time, but it still looks the same, okay? Then, disabling open rate tracking. Now, this is another thing that is a popular misconception in cold email. You should not be tracking the open rate of your emails because it hurts your deliverability very significantly. Now, it is a standard feature of all sequencers, and it is pretty much the most popular key performance indicator in traditional email marketing. But when it comes to cold email, open rate tracking is one of the worst things that you can have on, Reason is what's actually happening behind the scenes when you turn on open rate tracking is you're adding a 1x1 HTML pixel to all of your emails. And of course, when you add an HTML pixel, that violates our past rule of no links and no HTML. So it's not a good thing to do, and I wouldn't recommend it. Okay. Then next step, proper DNS record setup. Now, DNS records are basically domain settings that you have to enable in order for your Google and Outlook accounts to understand that you're an official sender. Okay. Now, I'm not going to go into explaining what exactly these records are or how they work because this video would be literally hours and hours long. But if you search up how to set up DNS records for a cold email account, you'll see what I mean. Now, forgetting to do this or misdoing it or just whatever it might be, not doing it correctly, will lead to terrible deliverability. So just make sure you're doing all of that stuff right. And of course, if you ever are unsure, you can use mxtoolbox.com to make sure that you actually have your DNS record set up correctly. Okay. Now, I will mention that if you are using an account reseller, like I mentioned previously in the video, whether it's premium inboxes, cheap inboxes, Inboxology, the mail supply, anybody like that, they do set up all of these DNS records for you, so you don't have to worry about that. But if you're buying directly from a email account, or if you're what I mean is if you're ever buying email accounts directly from Google or Outlook, then you will have to do this. Okay. Now, the next thing is you want to be buying accounts from trusted providers. This is, of course, under the circumstances that you are using a reseller. If you buy accounts directly from Google or Outlook, this doesn't apply to you. But if you are buying them from a reseller, then you need to make sure that you are buying accounts that are only Google and Outlook. Don't buy anything else. And you always want to use good resellers like premium inboxes, cheap inboxes, and ideally you just don't try out, ideally you don't try out private infrastructure at all. Okay. What we've seen personally is it just doesn't work as well. But if you do want to take your chances, then of course, just keep that aware. Then moving on to do not contacted uninterested leads. Now, when you're sending to a ton of prospects, you're going to have people that have no interest in your service whatsoever. Now, even if you have the best service in the world, right, you're not going to always have 100% interest. There's always going to be people who are not interested. Now, if you get somebody to tell you that, hey, I'm not interested, in no circumstance should you ever try to convince them that, hey, why is that? Any feedback would be useful, because then they're going to get annoyed by you emailing them and they're going to mark you as spam. So what we do is whenever there's anybody that is not interested, we'll go and we'll mark them as block in our Smart Lead instance, right? Now you can see any lead that you have in Smart Lead will have the option mark as block. And basically what this does is if you ever end up adding that lead into a future lead list, it'll exclude it because you've gone ahead and blocked them, okay? Now let's move on to ensuring relevant and targeted lead lists. Now, whenever you're sending emails, it's extremely important to target the correct industry that you're trying to sell your services in. So if your offer is meant to, for example, go to software companies, but you're sending it to e-commerce brands, you're going to end up getting spam reports because those people will know that your offer is not meant for them, okay? Now, if you're sending a lot of traffic, which is kind of, I guess, sending a lot of emails should be the more accurate way of saying that. A lot of people think that you can just send emails, just not worry about it, and that's it. Honestly, we live in a world now where deliverability is becoming an ever-growing issue. So that's really not a reliable strategy anymore. You can send a lot of volume, but you really need to make sure that your volume is sending to the right person, okay? Now, we've made this domain in the past, or we've made this mistake in the past, and we've ended up ruining tons of domains. So that's all I'm saying is just make sure that your emails that you're sending out are actually relevant. And matter of fact, I actually can give you guys an example. Recently, I ran a campaign to the Inc. 5000, just like I mentioned earlier in the video. And obviously, the Inc. 5000 is consistent of 5,000 companies. And I showed you guys the clay table, which I set up in order to determine whether they're B2B service-based businesses, which is our ICP. Now, after taking those Inc. 5000 companies and putting them through that filter, I ended up only getting 1,800 companies back, meaning the majority of that list was not valid. If I hadn't done that step and I would have just sent those emails, I would have effectively sent out like 60% of my emails would have been to the wrong people, and I would have gotten a ton of spam reports. So don't do that. It's not a good thing to do. So with that being said, let's talk about warm-up. Now, you need to ensure that you're using the proper warm-up settings. Warm-up for your email accounts for 14 days, you need to be using the proper warm-up settings, and 100% of the time, warm-up will help, is what I'm trying to say here, right? Meaning, I'll show a little picture below where I actually tested what would happen if you stopped using warm-up, but 100% of the time, warm-up will help. Now, it's crucial to make sure that your warm-up is on for at least 14 days and you're sending a proper amount of warm-up emails. Now, SmartLead has a very good warm-up process that we use. So if you want to take a look at what we do, I'm going to have this document right here, the best practices for warming up email accounts, so you can go ahead and check this out. Now, if you've double checked and everything looks good, then you're going to start going and booking hundreds of calls. Okay. Now, another thing that I want to show is what happens if you turn off warm-up. Now, this right here, what you guys are looking at is an inbox placement test. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar, an inbox placement test is pretty much the only way to test your deliverability accurately. So you can see right here, 1 week ago, we had a 0% deliverability score, meaning we saw that, okay, if we turn off warm up, we will literally inbox nowhere. Like, we just won't be able to get through. Then what we went ahead and did is we turned on warm up. We let it run for 2 days, which is why this is 5 days ago. Then you could see immediately we had a little bit of Google and 0 Microsoft, 12.5 total score. Then we turn it back on and you can see that we still had 0 Google, but 100% of Microsoft now. So we had a 50% score. Then after we let it run for 1 full week, we had 100, 100, 100, and we're going to let it run for another full week just to make sure the email account is totally good. But you can see that in this picture, warm-up definitively works, okay? Now, let's talk about booking calls and objection handling. Now, there are a couple of appointment setting rules that I want to go over. Now, whenever you're handling responses from interested prospects, it's very important to understand these rules. Now, here are the rules that you should be following. Now, number one, you always want to keep following up, right? Once a lead says that, hey, let's book a call, do not stop following up with them. Personally, we like to have a 3-day interval, so we'll follow up every 3 days, and we'll just keep following up for the rest of eternity until they tell us to stop, okay? Then we also like to provide value. So a lot of the time, if we post a new sales asset in our follow-up, we might say something like, hey, we post this new video talking about this, this, this. And the whole idea here is you want to stay top of mind, okay? Then next step is you always want to be replying within 5 minutes. So this is kind of common sense. Think about what happens when someone actually replies to your email. They're sitting on their Gmail app or their Outlook app, for example. They see your email, they read it, they reply to it, they click send. Now, if you're going to click send and then, go scroll your emails, you're going to consistently have an opportunity to get that person while they're still on their phone. Most people don't go on their phone to reply to just one single email. They'll be replying to other emails. So if you can reply to that person while they're still on their phone, that's going to help your conversion rate significantly, okay? Another thing is you always want to push for the call. Now, you never really want to go and push for, sending a contract or sending an agreement or sending a pitch deck or sending anything like that. Your main call to action should always be, let's book a call, because that's going to be what's actually going to get them to convert with you. Okay. Also, you always want to pitch times instead of calendar links. So what I mean by this is whenever you have a person who's interested, instead of telling them, hey, here's my calendar link, book a time that works. Instead, what you should do is you should tell them, hey, does 12 p.m. work? Okay, because you're going to have a much higher chance of converting that way. Another thing is you want to have clear call to actions whenever you're doing any sort of cold email. It should always be very apparent what it is you're trying to get the person to do, okay? Then you also want to double check that all your messages are being sent are relevant and are actually related to the conversation. Now, a lot of the time this will happen whenever you hire an inbox manager. That inbox manager might not know what they're doing, and they're just going to start sending out follow-up emails that just don't make sense. For example, the person will agree to a certain time, and then instead of that person booking the prospect in, they'll just say, well, how about this time? Does this time work? When in reality, that's not the point of conversation they're in, okay? And also you want to triple check that every email being sent out is free of spelling errors. This honestly is a given. There shouldn't be a surprise. Very unprofessional if you're sending emails with spelling mistakes. Now, here are some things that you shouldn't be doing. Number one, sending Calendly links. That's obviously makes it harder for the prospect and is also bad for deliverability. You don't want to thank them for the reply. If you say thank you for your reply, that kind of sets a negative pre-frame where their time is more valuable than yours. So I wouldn't do that. Another thing is you shouldn't ever ignore a prospect's question, right? Now, of course, you also shouldn't just be giving out prices or answering anything that's super, super sensitive, but you never should just ignore a prospect's question in its entirety, right? You also shouldn't be asking multiple questions in a single email, because if you ever do ask multiple questions, the prospect's not going to know which one to answer, and most of the time they'll only answer one of them. You also should never give prices over email for obvious reasons, because then you're going to scare the prospect away. They can't understand whether what you're selling is cheap or not. or more accurately, they can't understand if what you're selling is worth the money or not if they don't know exactly what you're selling. Okay. You also want to give up the follow-ups if you get a clear yes or no. So if the prospect does tell you, hey, I'm not interested, leave them alone. Don't ask why, don't ask for feedback, don't do any of that, because you're just going to hurt your deliverability. Okay. Also, you shouldn't be explaining your offer because then you're going to take too much time. Okay. If I were to make this entire video into an email and I were to explain everything that we do, like in its entirety, you might not even book the call with us, or you might not book a call with us because it's just going to be too much. Okay. Now, if you or your appointment setter just sticks to these rules, it's going to be very hard to not book calls, because all of these rules, they're just straightforward rules. There's not really like, opinion here. Like everybody knows that these are the appointment setting rules that you should be following. Okay. Now, also, it's always a good idea to always reply quickly, always reply with value, and always have a call to action. Okay. Now, the next thing I want to talk about is building objection sheets. Now, building these objection sheets is quite a hassle, so I'm just going to go ahead and share ours. It's going to be in the document, so you can just take a look. You can just copy over this document and then get any other information you need, right? Now, another thing that I will mention is utilizing AI assistance. Now, this is a decently new concept of leveraging an AI like ChatGPT to help manage your inboxes. We're at the moment, we have an internal system which references all our client data, all of our past replies. It's able to get like ICPs, offers, all that stuff, and generate positive replies for us. But if you're not looking to make that new automation yourself, then you can just go check out these softwares. I have heard of both of them. One of them is called inboxmanager.ai, and the other one is called RevReply. But the way I see it is you don't want your entire system to rely in the hands of another company. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend using these providers definitively, but it could be something that you just try out just to see how it works. Okay, and that is about it for this video, but I do want to make a quick announcement. If you're looking for done-for-you cold email and you are a B2B business already doing over 20K per month in revenue, and you want to scale using cold email, but you don't want to do it yourself, then you can apply to work with us. Now, the process is very simple. We just book a quick 30-minute call. We're going to check whether we can actually target your ideal client profile. We're going to do this live with you. We're going to talk about effective scripts and offers that we can pitch to your prospects. And we're going to reference our past work to show you how we've done similar things before. Now, if it makes sense, we'll make you an offer, right? If it doesn't make sense, then you just get free 30 minutes of coaching, which other people actually pay money for. And either way, you come out on top. So if you're interested, book a free outbound audit below. If not, then no harm, no foul. But in either way, hope you enjoyed. Like and subscribe if you did. Bye-bye.